Hello and welcome. My name is Tejal. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Tongva, Chumash, and Kitch people, colonially known as Los Angeles, California. Today's practice is one of our free practices that we like to offer monthly at Tejal Yoga. And all of our teachers get to offer these practices so that you can meet them, you can see the way they practice and what they offer. I was really moved to offer a practice called Yoga Sutra 101. It's not just a lecture on the Yoga Sutras, it's also a meditation. And then I invite in a mantra for you to help you ground in the start or in the continuation of your study of the Yoga Sutras. So, to begin, the Yoga Sutras is a guidebook for us to start to understand all the elements of the practice. It really talks about all of the ways in which we can practice, the whys in which we practice, the benefits of practicing, the outcomes of our practice, the obstacles. So really a guidebook that walks you through all of the troubleshooting, the FAQ, any kind of manual you get to put something together or to understand something for yourself. That's the Yoga Sutra. But the catch is that the Yoga Sutra is written in very short phrases. And the way it was described to me is terse. So not just short, but very direct without any added language that might be elaborate or descriptive. Terse. Aphorisms that hold a lot of meaning around what the practice is and how it could develop for us. And these terse aphorisms number anywhere from 195 to 196 phrases, but it depends on your translation. Which leads me to share with you the translation that I've selected for this practice and for my ongoing meditations. It's called 4 Chapters on Freedom, and it's a commentary of the Yoga Sutras by sage Patanjali, who I'll talk about in a moment. This commentary is written by Swami Satyananda Saraswati, and it comes to us from the Bihar School of Yoga. So if you get any books from the Bihar School of Yoga, they all have this similar gold at the top. They all have a dot here to resemble the tilak. And then they're all different topics and disciplines of yoga in book form. I have something that I call the Big Orange Book, which I use for a lot of reference around asana, mudra, pranayama, and bandha. And again, this one is called 4 Chapters on Freedom. And it's aptly named because the Yoga Sutra is codified into text into 4 chapters. So each chapter has a chunk of these phrases for you to sit with, ruminate on, and then really try to expound and apply meaning into your life. The freedom part here is really very straightforward because yoga is a practice that leads to collective liberation. Liberation is really freedom from bondage. Bondage in the practice of yoga is any type of attachment that we want something or even we don't want something. When you don't want something, when you're grossed out by something, when you reject a relationship, when you refuse to do something, that's also an attachment of emotion. And when you do want something and when you wish to dive into something or study something deeper, and there's a yearning and a desire and really a lot of arrangement to be able to do the thing, that's an attachment as well. So there are 2 buckets of attachments, raga and dvesha, which is desire or passion and repulsion. And these attachments lead us in life unless we know more, unless we know differently. So the practice of yoga helps us to understand a way to live our life that reduces that level of attachment. And why we might reduce that level of attachment, whether it's attachment to something that makes us feel good or attachment to something that makes us feel other than good, is because attachment inevitably causes suffering. If we set our expectations on something we wish to achieve, and any part of that achievement doesn't register the way we wished, there can be disappointment. There can be the feeling of setback. There can be the feeling of not enoughness. There can be the feeling of fear. of engaging again for that same result, one that was not intended. If we reject something, an interaction, an object, an experience, and then somehow we still interact with it because we know we cannot control every circumstance in our life. And so we might be faced with things we don't wish to be faced with, from the smallest thing, like something you might fear around the corner, or where did that little centipede come from? I don't know anything about that. Now I'm worried. Any of those feelings also create a little bit of suffering. There is something in the Yoga Sutra in chapter 2, verse 16, that is very slimly translated as pain and suffering that has not yet come can be avoided. And that phrasing might seem a little bit curious, but the way to translate the Yoga Sutra is to know that it's written in another language that has different meaning for every concept that it's written in. The sutras that I'm using are written in Sanskrit, as the majority of them are, which is an ancient living language in India. There are other ancient living languages like Pali. This written in Sanskrit tends to show up often in our yoga practices. And the way we like to translate is to have something very clear for us to come back to in the language that we know the most. So depending on the language that you know the most, you might have a translation in your back pocket for your favorite sutra or your favorite poses or things that you practice regularly. But it's important to note that that translation is just one of many. And the way that we interpret information is actually colored by our past experiences, by the way we infer things or assume to know what might be in front of us, which can lead to mistakes in perception. The other ways we take in information are through another person's testimony or storytelling and sharing. Other ways we take in information, and this is all written in the sutra, is through a sleep state and also through our memory. So the ways we take in information are vast. We have many different approaches to taking in information, to processing, and then creating thought around that. One of the more common examples around inference is seeing something in the shadow or the shade and taking it to be something that it's not. Like, you know, the shape of a snake. And so you might see on the floor with the lights off the shape of a snake and have an immediate reaction to that, right? A total freak out meltdown, or you might take charge. There might be something that is a response to that. Someone walks in and flips the light on and says, "What are you screaming about?" I just left my belt on the floor. Everything changes. And so this idea of inference shows up in our life all the time. So does this idea of what we remember from our life experiences, from our childhood, from interactions with others. And as time passes and we accumulate even more experiences, the distance grows between that memory, our memory recall, and our need for that memory. And so the Yoga Sutra reminds us that our memories can fade, our memories can be distorted. What we remember might feel 100% fact, and yet it might actually not be the case. And so we are really introduced to all these different ways that we might be associating knowledge and assimilating knowledge into our life that ultimately tendril out to one of these two attachments: passion or interest, rejection or disinterest. And then when we move into those places of attachment, what arises could be any of the feelings that you might label as suffering: pain, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually; shock in a negative way, even in a positive way; pause, disturbance. It could even show up physically: shaking in the body, rapid beating of the heart, unrhythmic breathing. The sutra is here then as a way to walk us through all of these paths, all of these what if scenarios, right? It is one of the philosophies that builds our foundation. And so we are met with obstacles in the sutras. We are met with practice types in the sutras. We are met with our association to the cosmic and the spiritual. We are told that with this practice, as deep as we can go over multiple lifetimes, you might arrive to a place where you gain powers in your life. You might arrive to a place where you have developed so much sadhana or personal practice and svadhyaya or self-study that on this path, you reach a bliss state, which is the ultimate goal. Bliss is another way to speak of freedom. So here we are with the 4 chapters on freedom. And the best way I can offer a practice on the Yoga Sutra is to start at the beginning. So I want to invite you into chapter 1, Sutra 1. Sutra is a Sanskrit word that can be loosely translated to thread. And the threads are all here. In 1.1 of the Yoga Sutra, the Sanskrit can be read as Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Atha Yoga Anu, like we have in our space, and Shasanam. Atha Yoga Anushasanam. So I invite you to say that back with me, but not before knowing what it means. That's a thing with me. So Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Atha, that first word, the first entry into the Yoga Sutra, which might even be some people's first entry into yoga, means now. Atha means now. And it's a reminder. If someone called to you and they said, now, you would think immediate. What is it? What are you asking me for in this moment? What about now do we need to think about? And the Yoga Sutra tells us now. Let's drop in now. Yoga, regarding yoga, the practice of yoga, calling to mind what we know of yoga, and Anushasanam. In summary, Anushasanam is instructions of, or practice of, or delivery of. It's a very open phrasing around what's to come. Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Now begins again the practice of yoga. Another way, now the complete instructions of yoga. Now the practice of yoga begins again. And Sutra 1.1 is so beautiful because it's so simple. It's so terse. It is what it is. But we can talk about it forever. What do we do to prepare? What do you mean by now? What is yoga? How complete are these instructions? The way that I like to think about Atha Yoga Anushasanam is now begins again the practice of yoga. And the way I relate that to my life is that every passing moment is a moment of now. So not the last moment and not the moment to come, but now begins again the practice of yoga. So if you're interested, I invite you to just repeat after me these 3 phrases or words that build Sutra 1.1. Atha, 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 Yoga, 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 Anu, Shasa, Nam. Anu, shasa, nam. Anushasa, anushasa, anushasanam. 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 So the mantra that I want to offer you is the recitation of this sutra. You can sing it. You can just say it, but let's sing it. Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Atta Yoga Anushasanam. And if you want to sing it in your head, if you find the rhythm in your body at any point and you're just like, Hatha Yoga Anushasanam, also add the meaning. Also remind yourself and think to yourself right now, what does a yoga practice mean to me? What does a yoga practice offer me? If it helps you to feel more free, the whole point of yoga is to embody that so it affects all the relationships around you. If it helps you to see inequity and imbalance in the world, it also helps you to combat that in a peaceful way so that you can have that be an example. Atta Yoga Anushasanam. So now begins again the practice of yoga. This is your reset. This is that moment that you can take at any time to say, I'm gripping, I'm rejecting, I'm not myself right now. Atta, I need to come back to now and remind myself that even now I can start this whole practice of breathing, of balancing, of calming, of tapping into true self now, and not worry that I didn't before or worry that I have to leave in a moment, but just now. So Atta Yoga Anushasanam is the first sutra. And then you move through other goals, other ideas, other obstacles, and the reality that obstacles will be there just because we continue to practice and practice in a more devoted way, in a more faithful way, does not mean the obstacles disappear. The obstacles will continue to be there. But the practice allows us to be with the obstacles in a balanced way. We eventually get to Sutra 216, which reminds us, Heyam Dukkam Anagatam. Heyam Dukkam Anagatam. Pain and misery that has not yet come can be avoided. How? Now, through the practice of yoga, as a reminder. And we move through the sutra, oftentimes even suspending disbelief because of the context of when and how this was written, and the way that we have moved towards a more scientific mind, a less spiritual mind, and we get to a place where we come out on the other side of the sutra. In the Yoga Sutra, you might be surprised to know that only once is the word asana mentioned, which might remind you that the practice of yoga through Patanjali's 8-limbed path, asana is one of the 8 limbs. Movement is just one of the 8 limbs. So the focus on movement has exploded based on current context of society, not the original intention. Not to say it's wrong now or it was right then, but to notice that the practice evolves and shifts to meet us where we're at. So I'd like to take just 1 minute sitting in contemplation with you, noticing what comes up, and just letting this time be our practice of breath, of atta, of now. Noticing if you can bring the mind's focus back to now, to begin again the practice of yoga. Each time you see another thought come up, notice it, but bring yourself back to now. I can begin again the practice of yoga. Deep breath into the whole body. Exhaling whenever you're ready. I invite you to take what you need from this practice and leave what didn't serve you behind. And we'll start to close this practice down the way I close almost all of my practices. Taking hands on the body or to heart center. Maybe an Anjali Mudra, palms touching, as an offering to these practices of yoga, to your teachers, and to all those who came before that have kept these practices safe for our continued benefit and study. Inviting in any gratitude you have for your ability to be here, just as you are, with life just as it is, and extending any of that gratitude out to those practicing with you today. Taking a moment to honor the land and its bounty, to acknowledge your ancestors and the indigenous stewards that walk this land. And we'll take a moment of silence to acknowledge the history, the struggle, the oppression, and unwilling sacrifice of many of those who have walked this land. May we work to repair harm and end suffering for all beings. Let's close with a message of peace. Om and Shanti 3 times. You might listen or join. Inhale to begin. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you so much for your practice. Thank you so much for allowing me to share mine with you.